My name is Amanda. I'm Millie German.
I'm Daniela.
I'm Kiara.
Our topic is race relations, and we're now open for questions.
What do you mean by race relations?
For race relations, we're just talking about basically the way like different race groups interact, and specifically we're going to be talking about whites, blacks, Hispanics, and Asians.
In the United States?
Yes.
How has race relations changed over the last, from the days of Dr. King and JFK to present day? How has the viewpoint of society changed as it relates to race relations from that day to this day?
I would say that it has been more opportunity given to minority groups, but also I think there's more awareness of each individual race group's needs. So there's more representation in government, in different job, workplace scenarios. So I would say it's better, but there's still room for growth and development.
Okay.
To add to what Danielle said, I would definitely say like race relations has almost become like almost more tense as we've grown due to the presence of media, and that's been just such a large factor into it because when Martin Luther King wasn't around, there wasn't like you can just pull out your phone and like at the tap of the button you have social media, so that's definitely a large factor into it.
But we're not fire hosing people anymore.
No, I'm just saying I think like,
So
it's become more access.
basically overall we have progressed, but there's still more room for growth, like she said. Like we still need to push further for equality, basically.
In what specific areas?
In the area of, well, we can talk about college admissions,
Okay.
because while minorities are given a whole lot of opportunities, sometimes other groups are kind of not as focused on them as much, and so while it's nice, why I may get a scholarship, someone else may not get the same scholarship that I have the opportunity to get. And in other ways, you know, there's the whole controversy with like how much people are paid, like some minorities may not make as much as someone who's white, or, you know, just the equal playing field.
And a lot of that sometimes I think is public perception and arguments that people make. I mean, are there any facts that would support what you're saying? I'm talking specifically about pay disparity.
I can't quote anything exactly. I've known that I've read something before about how there's one situation where an African American woman who was working in like a bank didn't make as much as like a white female did. And I don't remember the numbers exactly. I just remember reading it in an article, but I can't quote it.
Okay.
What's the difference between one's race and ethnicity?
So race refers to your physical appearance, and ethnicity refers to your cultural background.
So like I may identify, like my race may be black, but my ethnicity may be like Latino or something like that.
So I asked you about the areas of growth that you identified. Amanda, you also talked about areas of growth, and so did you, Daniela. When you say we've come a long way, but we still have work to do, where is that work that needs to be done?
I personally believe that a lot of where the growth needs to come from is it needs to come from so much as just saying like, oh, we're all just saying like everything's great and trying to celebrate these differences and celebrate the things that make us different. Instead of saying like, oh, you come from me, like I can relate to you. Celebrate the differences.
I would also add to what Amanda said and say that the wage gap between not only men and women, but also from different races, as Kiara mentioned, a white woman may earn more than a black woman, and I think that is unacceptable, and that is a big area of growth in our society.
Do you have any studies or statistics that would indicate that that is actually happening, other than a few anecdotal stories?
Not currently.
Okay. So again, is there a concern that a lot of the things that may divide us are just anecdotal stories or stories that get told around, and that when you look at the facts, it may or may not actually be the case?
I think there are some cases where it's just a bunch of stories, but there are other cases where there are statistics. like right now I'm doing an AP Lit research paper about the racial bias in the court system. And some of the statistics I've read is that like a person of color or a black person is 7 times more likely to be wrongfully convicted in court than someone who's white. And there are a bunch of percentages, like there's about between 32 and 34% of the prison population is African American, while the white percentage is about, I mean, it's not significantly lower. It's about like 30 or 31%. But when you look at the overall population of African Americans in America and compared to the white population, those numbers can be quite alarming.
In your research, have you found any suggestions as to why that is the case?
I've focused on a lot of racial profiling. There's just the fact, you know, there's the whole Black Lives Matter movement. There are people who are thrown into the police occupation that sometimes have like a racist bias, and maybe they may not be aware of it, or maybe they are, but sometimes they can attack people based on their looks.
Would you be willing to talk about some of the governmental policies that have been enacted over the years to address racial inequalities and race relations?
Okay, so definitely what we talked about before is affirmative action has been placed in schools to try and address the amount of white students in colleges as to people of color.
Yeah, there's affirmative action. There's also recently with the midterm election, whether it's not really particularly a policy, but we have a lot of people who were elected in the Congress who were like the first black woman from, what was it? Is it Massachusetts or Michigan?
First black woman from Connecticut.
First black woman from Massachusetts who were elected into Congress, which is, like I said, not a policy, but it's still someone getting involved in the government and being able to have a say in laws and things that are proposed to help move us along.
Do you think that government policies, so mandates and requirements and that kind of stuff, to either require, or maybe it's quotas or maybe it's affirmative action programs of different maybe universities, missions, and that sort of thing? What are some of the pros and cons of those types of programs?
For me, I don't think that programs that would have you meet a quota aren't like the best always. I think it should always be based on how hard someone has worked, and whether it's getting into college, if you have like same grades or and things like that, same extracurriculars. If it does come down to it, I don't think it should be race, but rather like background, like your socioeconomic background. So if it did happen to be a person of color that was that did have a socioeconomic background that was worse than an Asian who had a better upbringing or something like that, then they should get it. But if it's the opposite way, it shouldn't be just solely based on color.
There's also, one of the benefits of it is that it helps promote differences in diversity, because one of the things here about LCA is great, but our diversity percentage is very low. And so one of the good things about affirmative action is that it helps create less schools that have just a sea of just white people. We have people from different backgrounds, different cultures, different races, ethnicities that can all come together and get an education or get a job. Because one of the things when affirmative action was first started, it was during, after the civil rights movement, and so everything was changing and people were trying to integrate themselves together. And so it helped people get jobs, it helped people get into schools, and so that's one of the benefits. But one of the cons is, like you said, like a quota that they have to meet, because one of the things Mr. Mers talks to us about in government is that there are schools in Chicago that they have to have a certain amount of white people, a certain amount of black people, a certain amount of Asians, Hispanics, you know, just to make a quota, which I think is difficult and it strains the school because all they're focused on is race instead of just the education.
But also a very important part of improving race relations is having everyone be surrounded with people of different color.
I would definitely have to agree with Amelia and Kira.
So do you think it can be detrimental to race relations to have those quotas or affirmative action programs where you may have someone who may be on paper less qualified be able to take the place of someone who on paper is more qualified?
I think it can be detrimental because you can have like this malice that forms against people. They're like, oh, well, this person only got that position because they're a person of color, and that's not fair because I'm more qualified than they are. And in that aspect, it's not entirely fair because if someone's more qualified, then they should definitely be able to have that position. But I mean, yeah, I mean, there's some other things.
Well, I mean, I'm looking at, are there some different definitions of qualifications that we could be looking at? Certainly someone, let's say we've got somebody of color who comes from a lower socioeconomic background, may not have the same advantages growing up, so may not be able to have the same things to put on their resume. May not have been able to take enough tutoring classes or prep classes, so test score may be a little bit lower. Or may not have gone to a school that was as rigorous, so didn't have a bunch of AP classes, so they're not in a position to be able to compete against someone who had all of that. And so it's not necessarily an issue of black versus white, it's an issue of privilege versus not privilege. But because we pitch it as, this is part of our affirmative action program, and asking whether you believe that could actually hurt race relations.
I believe that if it is like that, any malice placed towards a different race because of someone getting a leg up and it doesn't seem like they should is not a good idea.
In that aspect of it where someone isn't as privileged, I think like they should have the same opportunity, because if you don't have some of those things given to you that are like an ACT prep class, like if you can't physically pay for an ACT prep class to bring up your score, then that's not your fault. You know, you can't control the income that comes into your household. And so I think in that aspect, like, people should keep that in mind. Now, whether they, and then, well, you still have to focus on like their work ethic too, because even though they may not have like the highest ACT scores, which, I mean, ACT score may not determine intelligence, it's whether you want to put yourself in a position to work hard. Like, do you really want to go to this school? And if you do, you should go. And you should work hard and prove to those people who may be against you that you deserve this just as much as they do, you know?
I think affirmative action can go either way. It can hurt or benefit a person or a group of people. In the case, as you have said, someone who might come from a lower socioeconomic background, they might not have the advantages as someone who might go to a private school like LCA, where they can afford any test prep course or any tutoring session that they want. I think in that case, it is important for students who are planning to specifically apply to a college, when they fill out the FAFSA forms, that helps to get a better understanding of their socioeconomic stance. So I think with affirmative action, it is not the best that it could be. It can be improved, and it should be improved. I think just the racial and ethnic parts of a student, those should not be the only factors that might qualify someone for a scholarship or a bonus. Their social economic stance, their family situation, life, however it is best called, I don't know that for sure right now, but all those things need to be taken into account when deciding who gets a scholarship and who does not.
How are we doing as a nation? Are we getting better? Are we getting worse at celebrating diversity, inclusion? You know, you think of some of the more prominent hate groups that were legally acceptable 20, 30, 40 years ago. And some of those have spun off into these smaller factions, right? They become violent. They're going into, you know, most recently we saw the synagogue in Pittsburgh. So as a people, Is it getting better or worse, do you think?
I personally believe that it's getting better, but the media tends to focus on the people who are spreading hate and the people who are trying to almost kind of like just break it apart. I would say the media focuses on that, so that's what's getting most of our attention instead of us celebrating each other.
I would say the media is definitely a business, so they're trying to get the thing that the best headline. So if it is something that is going to cause racial tension, then it might be that.
I agree and I disagree. I think as a whole the country is getting better, but with progress comes, with any progress in any field or in any matter, in any topic, there will be setbacks. Thank you. You're welcome. So, words. So yes, as a nation we are getting better, but with the presence of media, the setbacks that are happening, they are shown to the world, and that can have its consequences. But it's also evident that the nation is becoming more polarized. So there's a lot of extreme opinions where nobody wants to listen to anybody else. They have their own opinion, they have their own truth, and they don't want to mix in with other people. That makes sense.
That makes sense. It does.
I'd have to go with Daniela in the fact that, okay, maybe it's because I was much younger in politics, but I've never felt so on edge sometimes as I do now. And like I said, maybe that's because I was younger, or maybe that's because things have maybe changed. But now that I've gotten older, there are some things where I feel like on edge about, and like sometimes some things that I'm fearful about that I'm kind of just like, it freaks me out. But also, I can say that we've definitely gotten better as a nation in the ways that, clearly we progressed. Like, we've had the civil rights movement, we have our schools integrated, like I'm able to come to LCA, like in that way we have definitely gotten better. And I'd say that in the way that our generations have progressed, because I feel like our generation has become more accepting of people. Like, I don't feel afraid to just go up to anybody and be their friend,
Kira, you said that some things kind of freak you out. What are some of those things that scare you?
When the police brutality thing came up a whole lot more, I started to fear, not really particularly for my life, but like my dad's, because you see a lot of black men who are targeted, and my dad's like one of those, he's like a big man, but like he's not scary. He lets flies outside. Like, he doesn't kill a fly. But if a policeman pulls him over, like, they're not gonna know that. They're just gonna see a black man in this car, and sometimes fear can make us do things that are irrational. And so I fear for my father's life sometimes. And so in that aspect, I'm on edge. And sometimes when you talk to certain people that are like really hardcore, like Trump supporters, like all the time, sometimes like I have to watch what I say, because I want to state how I feel, but also I don't want them to like be attacked because like I may feel something different than they do.
So as a follow-up question, and this is for all of you to answer, what, hearing your example compels someone like me who has lived a life of privilege simply because of the color of my skin. I can't relate to what your father experiences or what you experience, but what can I do? What can we do to better understand and to make a difference, to try and bring about more equality? What types of things can we do to bring about that positive change?
I think honestly it's just to simply educate ourselves, because obviously I'm not going to have the same experiences as Kiara or even Danielle growing up in a different country. Like, I'm not going to know where they're coming from. We might not watch the same TV shows, right? I feel like before we state our opinions and before we like step a foot in, like we need to educate ourselves. Like, for example, like with me with the Black Lives Movement, when I was researching this topic, I didn't know some of the actual details that went on, and it changed my opinion so much about it. And just to simply to educate myself.
before we go on to Millie, can you share some of the things that you learned about Black Lives Matter?
With the Black Lives Movement, I definitely thought, I just heard the stories and I was on social media posts about like hashtag Black Lives Matter, and I was